Hello and welcome to another episode of Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that looks at the psychological and emotional components of endurance sports and how they impact performance. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder and coach at TEC. And on this episode, I want to talk about the science of pushing yourself. I've talked a lot on this podcast about about why we should push ourselves, the value of pushing ourselves, of doing hard things, getting outside of our comfort zone, committing to our full potential. I've spoken with others about that at length, and I want to unpack and provide some of the actual hard science of why it's important and why it's valuable and why it matters to push ourselves. And this it's not coming out of thin air. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about, specifically. Specifically in the last several months, what I'm seeing is that it's becoming harder and harder for people to really to really commit to do hard things, to really find the time, the energy, the bandwidth. And I think there's a lot going on. I think what we're really, in my opinion, coming to understand at a very basic level now, and we're still unpacking it, is the real trauma that we all have sustained as a result of the global COVID-19 pandemic, and the disruption that it caused in our lives, the way that it impacted us, both from kind of our day-to-day lives, how we managed our families, how we managed our work life, to how we move through society, and the stress oftentimes associated with that. And there's so much that at play there. But what I have seen is that the conversations that I'm having with athletes now are unlike any conversations I've ever had in my coaching career. And there's so much there's so much at play. There's so much stress. There's so much there's so much fatigue present from balancing everything over the last several years. And again, managing all of the different pieces and parts of our lives, the changes that were present and came about as a result of the shifts globally. And again, it's this. I think it's a very dynamic construct, and again, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface as it relates to fully understanding, through social and psychological sciences, what it actually means for us to kind of fully give weight to what we've experienced, what we continue to experience, and how that will alter our world for the long term. But what I'm seeing in my little corner of the world as it relates to the work that I do and my mission and vision for athletes is that those conversations are becoming more and more challenging. It's more and more challenging for athletes to carve out that time, to understand why they should make the time, to understand how they need to set goals, why they should set stretch goals, why they should stick with those goals. I'm finding more and more that communication is challenging. We're all stretched really thin, and it is harder and harder, seemingly, for athletes to find the time and the bandwidth and the energy to communicate with the support team that they need to reach their goals, be that a coach, their family members, teammates, physical therapists, dietitians, and so on. And so, all of that combined creates a very dynamic situation. It's a situation that doesn't necessarily, at face value, set individuals up for success. There's a lot going on, and again, what it boils down to is I'm seeing that it's harder and harder for people to commit to themselves. And if you listen to this podcast, you know that's something that I believe very, very strongly in, is the idea that, or what I would, refer to as the truth, that there is immense value in committing to yourself, to making sure that that is something that you hold, that you hold in high regard and you make time for. And it has always been challenging. It has always been the thing that so many athletes struggle with, but really in the last 6 months, has it seemed to really take shape in a way that I've never seen, in my capacity in my coaching career, to date. Not at the levels that we're seeing it. And so what I want to do is just work to unpack that, and I want to work to provide some kind of hard science evidence of why it's important to push ourselves. So versus just saying it, and I want to tie that back to what we're actually going through. What it, hopefully, to give examples of what it looks and feels like to move through day to day, and to make decisions around how we actually commit to ourselves. We're seeing so many statistics come out now, around the impact that the last several years have had, on the world, but specific to my location, to Americans. The CDC reports that 42%, of Americans reported gaining what equals out to be an average of 30 pounds, over the course of the pandemic. We're seeing, 16 states, in the United States are now reporting, that over 30% of their population, is overweight, or obese. And that's a result of stress. It's a result of a more sedentary lifestyle, again, due to the disruptions in our day to day lives, and the closure of so many outlets that we had to exercise, and the lack of security. Not knowing what was going to happen, not feeling like we could move through the world in a way that we were comfortable with or we were used to. So it's not, I don't provide those statistics to put blame or fault on anyone, but we definitely are seeing a connection between, again, the trauma and the experience that we've had, and how that's resulted, how that's impacted, our health. Um, you know, we're um, we're seeing a shift in our ability as individuals, as a society, to prioritize ourselves and our health first. And so, what I want to do again is to dive into that, to understand, first, why does it matter that we push ourselves? Where does it come from? When we feel that resistance to commit to hard things, why do we feel that resistance in the first place? Why doesn't it feel easier? If it's something that we want, why is it so damn hard? And then to, like always, help to provide some tools, and to again use science, to make the link between that uh, the why to a better understanding of how we can actually move forward. So a lot going on, and this is something that, again, just, it's fascinating in the sense that I see so much opportunity for individuals if we can um, help people see the value in pushing themselves, help people understand what it is that's getting in their way. And so often, as we'll see, it's not things that are blatantly obvious. It's these kind of deep seated psychological, components of who we are, of our kind of social constructs, that we make decisions based on or out of, and we don't even realize that we're getting in our own way. But it's really become exponential in so many ways over the last several years, and it's something that, again, more and more I'm faced with as I help athletes uncover how they can be the best versions of themselves and reach their full potential. Um, and so that's there's a I think it's all well and good to say, let's commit to yourself. There's value in doing hard things, but I realize, and I'm the first person that's guilty of this. If you don't know why you're exhibiting that behavior, or maybe what's getting in your way, it can certainly be easier said than done. Especially when it feels like maybe you're starting from scratch. If you're one of those people that has been more sedentary, or maybe has experienced some weight gain, or a shift in your confidence, or your ability to engage in movement in the way that you did, some time ago. All those things matter. And it impacts how we make decisions, how we set goals, how we see ourselves. So I want to talk about, again, the science of pushing yourself. And the first place that I want to start is just this idea of the hedonic principle. Those of you that are listening might be familiar with this. It's a relatively well-known kind of psychological construct, and it's just this idea that we're wired to seek out enjoyable experiences. We're wired to seek out the easy path. That's classic path of least resistance. And the reason that I start with that is because I do think it's important to understand that principle and then use it to provide some context. The context is that if everything else has been more challenging, right? Moving through our daily lives, getting the kids to school, um, tapping into our work environment, if that happened to be remote. If it's not remote, there was more stress to that, right? How do we remain safe in our workplace? How do we keep our coworkers safe? When we come back home, how do we keep our families safe? Stress on top of stress, small decisions, and all of that adds weight. So if those seemingly normal things, or the things that were relatively fixed and consistent in our lives, started to require more high level decision making, started to require more brain power, and more mental and emotional space, then in anywhere that we can, we're going to naturally take this path of least resistance. We're going to tap into that natural, wiring that's going to help us make the easier decision to save energy for other things. So again, we can see just that very simple principle or idea start to take shape, where as it applies to doing hard things and setting goals, specifically physical goals. If everything else in our life is more challenging, if it's harder, if we have to put in the effort there, right? We need to maintain our job. We need to continue to show up for our family, to support our family, to be there for our friends. All of these things require more effort. Well, then when we go to shift our focus to our goals from a physical perspective, to movement based goals, it's a hard thing to put energy into, right? It is easy to just take that path of least resistance, and so that could have manifested itself in several ways. It could have manifested itself in not doing anything at all, right? We just don't have the energy, so the path of least resistance is to be more sedentary, and it could have manifested itself in that we downplay our goals, or we set goals that are not quite as challenging, but we know we're going to we know we're going to meet them. but again, they don't require as much thought. They don't require as much effort. And so that's a good, for me. That was when I used it as a construct to understand why I'm having more of these challenging conversations, or why I'm having conversations with people that are having more challenges or a harder time committing to themselves, pushing harder. Um, that made it really clear for me. I was like, oh yeah, there's so much effort required to do all these other things, that when it comes to this thing, we take an easier path, and because we just don't have the energy, we don't have the bandwidth. Everything else is so much harder. Um, but what we're seeing now is we're seeing studies being released that are actually looking at the positive impact of pushing ourselves and how that impacts our overall life satisfaction. One of the more recent ones was in the Journal of Positive Psychology, released earlier this May, and they did a study that when people push themselves, they had two groups. When the individuals that pushed themselves reported on their overall life satisfaction, those that set stretch goals or stepped outside of their comfort zone reported a higher life satisfaction than those that operated within their comfort zone or weren't stretching themselves. So, really interesting stuff. We're starting again to see science applied to the value of pushing ourselves, the value of stretching ourselves. So, those are a few just kind of constructs to set the stage. Now, I want to go through 5 areas that I've identified in my research that I thought really helped to capture, why the science behind pushing ourselves. Again, why does it matter? Why do we need to show up? Why is it so challenging in the first place? Because it is challenging, right? If it wasn't, everybody would do it. We're not talking about things that everybody does on a daily basis, right? As much as I would love for that to be the case, as much as I would love for everyone to really reap the benefits and see the value in reaching your full potential as it relates to reaching a physical goal. It's not the case, and it's while it's my life's work to help people understand that, and as many people as possible, most people are not going to engage in that. So it is challenging. It's always going to be challenging, but again, it's become, I think, even more so. And so I want to go through these 5 areas to help you guys, again, understand more fully and more comprehensively the science behind some of this stuff. And as always, hopefully help you with some actionable takeaways on how you can apply these things to your life, to the areas that you're maybe struggling with. So the first one is to set realistic goals. Talked a lot about goal setting on this podcast. Talked a lot about the value in setting stretch goals. I just mentioned the study in the Journal of Positive Psychology about setting stretch goals. So there's this fine line between setting goals that are aggressive, but also understanding your capabilities, and using your ability to set that threshold for your goal. And what the science supports, a measured goals that are in alignment with your ability. So it's basically, you can think of it like, if it's too aggressive, then our brains can very quickly shift to, well, that's too hard. I probably won't win, or I probably won't complete it, or I probably won't have the time or energy to actually train appropriately for this thing. So why even show up? right? So if it's too aggressive, if it's too much of a stretch goal, then it can be easier to pull back, and that would be a reverting to that hedonic principle, so that path of least resistance. This thing's too hard, so I'll take the easy path. So the realistic goal, is that thing that's just outside of your ability level. And the reason that I started with this one is because this is something I've seen show up for a lot of athletes, right? So let's link it to the last several years. A lot of folks were cooped up, weren't able to do the things they wanted to do, whether that's races, trips, experiences, group activities, whatever it was. Um, their ability to do those things and engage in those things began to be approachable. And so many people maybe went in a little too deep, right? So let's say, you maintained relatively, consistent running over the last several years. But again, you were stressed. You were really trying to manage lots of different pieces and parts. And, you ran 5Ks consistently. Well, things started to open back up again, and you signed up for a marathon in a few months. So that's a good example of, or I use that to highlight a goal in relation to your ability level, right? Where I think what's important is that we use that science to understand how to pace ourselves in such a way where we can really enjoy the full experience, right? So maybe a marathon is your long-term goal, but maybe we set, a 10K, a half marathon, and a marathon out over the next, year and a half. And we build comfortably into that to ensure you enjoy the process. Again, if we outpace that, if you get into that training and you outrun your ability level or you outpace your ability level, the process really suffers. Your joy in that process suffers. And again, you're going to revert to, or it's much more easy to revert to that path of least resistance, right? You're like, well, I'm never going to be able to build to that type of mileage. I don't have the fitness I thought I did. Maybe you get upset that you lost fitness during a specific time period. And so then you give up on those goals. So setting those realistic goals is important, and again, seeing more and more of this, everybody's antsy, everybody's excited to dive back in. That's fantastic, but let's not outpace, our ability level. Let's be realistic about where we're at. That's okay. And work to set goals accordingly and establish a runway that's in alignment with that ability and those goals. So again, there's some psychology there that if we understand that, it helps us understand or better pace our experience, better understand the process needed to reach our goals. Not that those stretch goals are completely unobtainable. It's that we just might need more time. And again, that's something that we've seen a lot in the endurance sports space. There's a lot of eagerness to dive in head first. I love that, but let's pace it, right? Again, set realistic goals in alignment with your ability. Stretch goal just on the outside of that, and that's going to be the sweet spot that keeps you excited, motivated, helps you find joy in the process. The second area is to find goals that are in alignment with your true self. So, what do I mean by that? Again, coming out of limited opportunities to engage in endurance sports, to engage in in outcome-based goals, races, events, things like that. A lot of folks, it's easy to get wrapped up in the moment, right? So you're planning, you're around your friends, people are talking about big goals. Maybe you're out on a training ride or run or whatever it is. You're with a group that you like to train with. Everybody's signing up for these different things. You get pulled into it. And in the moment you're excited, you're feeding off that energy. That's great. You go back home, you think about it, or you actually have to commit to what it's going to look like to train for that thing. You find that your heart's not really in it. So this is what I'm talking about. So set goals that are in alignment with your true self. Don't get pulled in another direction. What do you want to do? So again, this is that positive psychology piece. You're going to be more invested in things that you actually care about. So you can tell yourself that you can stick with it and you can show up and you can grind it out. And maybe you can, but how long can you do it for? Right? Do you do it for one training cycle? Do you do it for one race? Do you do it for one season? Um, However long it lasts. But again, the goal is sustainability and to find joy in that process. So stay true to yourself and don't be afraid to tap into what that thing is, right? If all your friends or the people around you or training group or wherever you're getting pulled, social media, Strava, so on and so forth, if they're all signing up for an epic bike race and you'd rather go on a week long backpacking trip in the mountains, go that way, right? Maybe you jump into training rides to support those friends. You use it as a complementary training tool, but it's not the thing that you pour yourself into because your heart's not in it, right? Do the thing that you want to do. And if we can remember that when we're setting our goals, that's going to be the piece that keeps us sustainable. And again, we're there now more than ever because there's an energy that we need to do something, right? We have to set some goal. Well, I might as well set this goal based on what my friends are doing. And if that's in alignment with your true self, by all means, rock and roll. If you find yourself fighting it, it's never going to work. All right. You're not going to stick with it. You're not going to enjoy the process. Again, it's not going to be sustainable, which for me is the worst part because you never actually get to realize the full benefits of committing to that athletic experience. So number 2, make sure your goals are in alignment with your true self. What do you want to do? Do that thing, commit to it. That's going to make you happy. Third one is consistency is king. So if you've listened to the podcast, I talk about consistency a lot. It is all that matters, right? Whatever you do, however much you do it consistently, right? So if 2 days a week of movement is all that you can manage or all that works for you in order to keep things sustainable, fantastic. Do that every week, 2 days a week, and that's going to yield results over time. So it's not about what's best, or it's not about what is, the best training plan, quote unquote, or the hardest workouts, or the latest greatest flash in the pan fad, this, that, and the other. What matters is what can you do consistently, day after day, week after week, year after year. That's what's going to get you to where you want to go. So with that in mind, now studies in neuroscience support as much consistency as possible. So there's been some recent studies that show that not only is consistency in terms of exercising weekly, for instance, right? So that would be kind of the macro version of consistency is I'm going to exercise 4 days a week. I can show up and do that every week. And that's going to give me the consistency I need. That's fantastic. That's a great starting place. What we're seeing now being uncovered is that the more consistency and the more specific consistency that you can manage to obtain, the better. So things like, can you exercise at the same time, or can you do that thing at the same time? I am a huge advocate and a big believer, because I've seen it show up in my own life in such a productive way, of scheduling your exercise. Everyone's busy. Everyone has crazy days, work lives, home lives. It's hard to manage all the pieces and parts. If you're one of those people, try to schedule your exercise. Block it out just like you would a meeting, a call, a game that you have to go to for your kids, whatever it is. Do it in a way that makes sense for your schedule and show up to that thing like you would show up for everything else. Um, and when your calendar buzzes or you get a notification or you see it, it's time to do that thing, right? It's time to go exercise. So work to show up at the same time. So, maybe that's in the morning. Maybe that's a lunch break. Maybe that's in the evening right after work. Maybe, again, it has to work around your schedule. And I understand that everybody has different constructs and different ways that they move through their day. But if you can set up the same time, that starts to really encourage and really kind of set into stone that consistency. Another layer of consistency is same context. So can you be in the same environment, right? Can you set up an opportunity where when you show up to a specific space, that's you're doing the same thing, right? You have a room in your house, you have a space in your garage, you have a space in your bedroom. Where when you show up to that space, it's time to exercise, it's time to move. That helps to solidify those neural pathways that further lead to consistency. Even furthermore, same activity. So there's a few ways to think about this. One, do the same activity, right? So Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12 o'clock, you do strength training, right? Tuesday, Thursday at 5 p.m., you do an endurance activity, do an aerobic activity, whatever it is. The other way to think about this is that when you set aside that time, say it's, every morning at 7 a.m., even if you wake up and say you have a bike ride planned, if you wake up and you don't feel good, or maybe you're a little injured, or maybe you speak with your coach and you're going to delay that planned workout, still use that time for movement. So maybe that's stretching, yoga, mobility work, light movement just to check in with your body, even meditation. That time still holds the same space. It has the same meaning. So again, what we're doing is we're building neural pathways that help to bolster consistency. The more consistent we can create that time, the more consistent that space can be, the more consistent that activity can be within that space and within that time, the easier it's going to get to execute. One of the hardest things for athletes to do is to manage a schedule that's always in flux. So, Monday you wake up and you respond to your day. And again, this has been one of the biggest changes we've seen, is that people are more reactive now than they've ever been, right? Because things are in flux, but because we're outside of our comfort zone, because the work environment is different, home life is different, school schedules are different, we are reactive versus proactive, right? We used to have much more control of our work life divide. We used to have much more control over how our days unfolded. A lot of those things are becoming much more challenging for people. And so we wake up and we're putting out fires. We're reacting. If we can carve out that time, it allows us to be proactive. And that proactive activity is critical for consistency. And when we're putting out fires, when we're responding, it is so hard to nail down consistency. And I know that so many of you listening have felt this, right? Is you feel this pressure to get in your workout at some point in the day, but you're not sure when that's going to be. You're not sure how much time you're going to have. You're not sure if you're going to be able to complete the whole workout, so you're going to get in part of it. And then there's a stress associated with that. Really quickly, we get into a downward spiral. We get into a lack of confidence. We get into some self doubt. There's a lot connected when we don't nail down consistency. So, really encourage you again, and this is based on neuroscience. Is the more consistent we can create, or the more opportunities we can create for more specific consistency, the better. Number 4 is we want to fight the expediency bias. So, expediency bias, very similar to the hedonic principle that I mentioned earlier. The expediency bias is very simply that, we want to look for quick solutions. So again, if we tie it back to our experiences, the trauma that we have, because we're tired, because we're stretched thin, because things are more challenging, because life, if we kind of boil it down and simplify it, because life takes more effort than maybe it felt like it used to, we can lean on this expediency bias, and this is a bias that's linked to how we make decisions. There's several of them. You've probably heard of the experience bias, and so the expediency bias is, again, we look for quick solutions, and it doesn't mean that we're looking for the best solution. We're looking for the quickest solution because it's the path of least resistance. It doesn't take as much brain power. It doesn't take as much thought or commitment or effort. Now, what we know is that the expediency bias so often doesn't actually give us the result that we want, or doesn't produce the best decision, right? This is the, I'm not sure what the best answer is, so I'm just going to go with my gut. It's the snap decision that is based on what's the quickest path to an answer where I can put this behind me and move on. So if we link that to our goals as athletes and to endurance sports, we can see how during the last several years, this could have so easily manifested itself in all areas of our lives. But again, specifically as athletes, could have manifested itself in our diet, right? I don't have the energy. I don't feel like I have the energy to make decisions about how to eat healthy. I'm going to take the quickest path, the easiest path, just so I can feed myself. It doesn't produce the results we want, but it's an answer. It's a solution. Rinse and repeat. Exercise, right? It's harder. It's more challenging to push myself. So I'm either not going to exercise at all, or I'm going to do a really easy thing that I know is actually not going to yield the results I want. It's not going to make me feel how I want. It's not going to help me reach my goals like I'd like to. But I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna leverage or lean into the expediency bias so that it's quick. And the list goes on, right? We can apply that quick path to a decision in any area of our lives, but we can see how it so often doesn't yield the results that we want. And so that's when, we want to think about, what do we actually want, right? Yes, this is an easier decision to make. Yes, it doesn't require as much thought or effort. But does it yield the results that I'm looking for? Is it actually going to make me happy? Does it bring me joy? Does it get me closer to my goals? So often the answer is no. And so that's where, again, we understand where we kind of naturally go to when we're pushed, when we're stressed, when we're stretched thin. Maybe we sit with that for a second, right? Yeah, I had a stressful day. It would be easier to not exercise, or it would be easier instead of going for my run just to go for an easy walk. What if I just tried to run for 10 minutes and see how I feel? Check in with myself. If I still feel too tired, I'll walk home. Odds are I'll feel pretty good, right? Odds are once I get moving, I'll actually support my goals. I'll feel good about myself. I'll have more energy. Same thing with diet, right? If I make healthy decisions, if I make decisions that I feel good about, that's going to support healthy decisions down the road. So, one good decision leads to another good decision. It's much easier to build on a solid foundation than a shaky one. So, the last one that I want to talk about is that we want to factor in the cost. So, when we're thinking about decisions, and we do this in all areas of our lives, we do a cost benefit analysis, right? Some people go as far as to write it down. But even if we don't, do a pro con list or write down what the actual cost of a thing is, we always factor that into our minds, or in our minds. And so when we think about the cost of health, when we think about the cost of our goals, when we think about the cost of pursuing those goals, what happens psychologically is that we almost always only think about the costs associated with doing that thing. We don't think about the costs associated with not doing that thing. And there are costs to both. Now, the costs for doing that thing are often much more clear cut. So we break that down. The cost for signing up for a marathon can be broken down into actual financial expenses, right? You have to sign up for the race. You need a new pair of running shoes. You're not sure how to train for a marathon, so you need a coach. You are going to need nutrition equipment, right? Or nutrition supply. You're going to pay for that every month to make sure that you're hydrated and well fueled. You might need a gym membership as supplemental training to your run training. So those are all line items, and you can come up with a cost, and that can create friction in a number of ways, right? It can create friction internally. Say, oh, that's a lot of money. Not sure if I value that thing that much. It can create friction in our families, right? If our partner or those that we're close with or those that rely on us, if they don't value that thing, if they can't see the value in that bottom line, then that's going to create friction. So the cost benefit analysis, we can very clearly see the cost of doing the thing, right? And often that has an actual number, whether it's monthly or yearly or whatever. What we don't see is the cost of not doing that thing. And it's not quite as clear, but it's so important to factor it in. So let's use signing up for a race. Okay, so I sign up for a race. I need equipment. I need a coach. Maybe I need, massage therapy. I'm going to need, again, gym membership. Whatever those pieces are. It doesn't necessarily have to be that complex, but there is a cost associated with it. Well, what's the cost of not doing it? It's your health. It's your, mental and emotional state. It's the value of carving out time for yourself. It's how you feel when you reach that goal. It's how you feel when you engage in that process. It's the joy that process brings. It's how it makes you a better person and how it allows you to show up for yourself and how it allows you to show up for others. It's your long-term, health. It's your long-term satisfaction with what you've accomplished. So there's all these costs that maybe they don't have a dollar sign associated with them, but they are immense. And I would argue that they are much greater than the costs associated with doing the thing. But we get bogged down in the bottom line, right? We see the cost of doing the thing. We don't see the cost of not doing the thing. So I'd encourage you to think about the cost of not doing the thing. It is hard. It is hard to commit. It's hard to carve out a consistent schedule. It's hard to set realistic goals. It's hard to continue to push yourself. But those hard things are important because the cost of not doing them is immense, right? And it can be as simple as the cost is not being healthy, right? And at the end of the day, our health is all we have, right? We've heard that time and time again. So, quick recap: 5 areas scientifically that we see that support why we should push ourselves and why it's challenging to do that, but why it's important. Number 1 is to set realistic goals, right? So your goals need to be in alignment with your current ability. Set your goals just on the other side of that, and use that to create a runway that allows you to enjoy the process, to find joy and sustainability in those athletic goals. Make sure your goals are in alignment with your true self. Number 2. And don't get pulled in too many different directions. Focus on what you want and do that thing and set goals around that. Number 3, consistency is king. As much consistency as you can carve out, make it happen. So again, not only time of day, but the place, the activity. Really set an intention to make consistency a part of what you do. Use that as an opportunity to be proactive versus reactive. Again, we've gotten more and more reactive as our circumstances have changed on a day-to-day basis. Be consistent, or at least work to infuse as much consistency as possible. Number 4 is to fight the expediency bias. Don't do the thing that is easiest, right? Really work to think about what's the best actual decision that you can make, not necessarily the easiest. And number 5 is to factor in the cost of not doing the thing, right? When we're doing a cost benefit analysis in our heads, when we're setting goals, when we're thinking about what we want to accomplish, don't just factor in the cost of doing the thing. What does it cost to not do it? I promise you that the cost of not doing it is much greater long-term than the cost of actually doing the thing. So, I hope this was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, let us know at EnduranceMinded.com. And thanks so much for those of you who have rated and subscribed and shared Endurance Minded with your friends. If you've yet to do so, please do it. It means so much to me. It's the lifeblood of podcasts. So rate, subscribe, share on any platform that you listen to. It would mean the world to me. And if there's any way that I can help, let us know at EnduranceMinded.com. As always, ThomasEnduranceCoaching.com for anything that we talk about on the podcast. Our world-class coaching team would love to talk to you, love to understand how we can support you, and if there's anything that we can do to help you better understand these constructs, how to integrate them into your life, how to integrate them into how you set goals, how you find joy in the process as an athlete. That's our passion. That's what we're here to do. And you can reach us at ThomasEnduranceCoaching.com. And until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks so much.